I love you, but I'm not in love with you. If your spouse dropped this bomb on you recently, you're probably spiraling. You're wondering, how can you love someone but not want to be with them? Well, here's the truth. This isn't the end of your marriage. It's not a character flaw. It's simply a loss of polarity. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain exactly why this happens and give you 3 specific steps to flip the switch, to create some mystery, and get them legitimately in love with you again. Welcome, guys. I'm Brad Browning, aka The Marriage Guy, and for the past 15 years, I've been helping couples rescue their relationships from the brink of divorce, even when the situation seemed completely hopeless. So let's start by decoding this phrase, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. So when your husband or wife says this, the first thing you need to understand is that they're usually being honest. They aren't, lying to let you down easy. They really do love you. They care about your well-being. They probably still think you're a great parent, a reliable partner, and a good person. You share a history, and you have a deep, comfortable bond. But that bond has become safe. It's become predictable. Essentially, you become roommates. Now, psychologists often refer to this as companionate love. It's warm, it's fuzzy, and it's stable. But it lacks the danger, the excitement, the mystery, and the sexual polarity that makes someone feel in love. You see, we often mistake love for a single emotion. But in a marriage, there are 2 distinct engines that keep the car moving. And one engine is attachment, and that is the safety, the comfort, the friendship. That's the I love you part. And the other engine, the other part of it is desire. That's the in love part. And here's the brutal truth about desire. Desire cannot exist without space. Desire is the feeling of wanting something that you don't fully have. It thrives on a little bit of uncertainty. It thrives on the unknown. And when you've been married for a while and you settle into a comfortable routine where you know exactly what your spouse is thinking, you know exactly what they're going to do on a Tuesday night, and you're always available to them, well, that unknown disappears. The gap between you closes. And when there's no gap, there's no spark. So usually when the in-love feeling fades, it's because the polarity in the relationship has died. You've become too available, too predictable, or perhaps you just let the romance slide for too long and allowed yourself to become a sure thing. But just because that feeling is gone right now doesn't mean that it's gone forever. Attraction isn't a static thing. It's a light switch. You can flip the switch back on, but you have to stop doing the things that turn it off. And this brings me to the first major phase of your recovery plan, which is step number 1. You must stop trying to logic your partner back into love. This is probably the single most common mistake that I see my clients make. When we hear that our spouse is pulling away, or when they drop that I'm not in love with you bomb, our survival instinct kicks in. We tend to panic. We feel the ground crumbling beneath us, so we try to grab onto something solid. We try to grab usually onto logic, and we start acting like lawyers in a courtroom. We try to present, evidence to the jury. So you might find yourself saying things like, but look at our history. We've been through so much together. Think about the kids. Do you want to break up this family? Or we promised for better or worse, remember? When you do this, you're really trying to negotiate desire. You're trying to debate their feelings. And folks, listen closely. You cannot negotiate genuine desire. Attraction isn't a choice. It's a biological reaction. Your spouse can't decide to be in love with you any more than they can decide to be hungry or decide to be tired. They either feel it or they don't. When you try to argue them out of their feelings, 2 terrible things happen. First, you validate their decision to pull away. When you beg, plead, and present logical arguments, you look weak. You look fearful. You look like you don't believe that you're a prize worth fighting for. And nothing kills attraction faster than insecurity. And second, you create pressure. Your spouse is already feeling guilty. They probably feel terrible about hurting you. And when you list all the reasons why they should stay, you're just piling guilt on top of their lack of attraction. And when someone feels pressured and guilty, what do? They tend to run away. They withdraw further to escape that pressure. So if your spouse feels zero spark for you right now, crying, begging, or presenting a logical argument for why they should love you is actually going to make things worse. It makes you look needy and pitiful. And pity, of course, is the complete enemy of desire. You don't want your spouse to stay with you out of pity. You want them to stay with you out of passion. So really, effective immediately, you need to accept their feelings. Now, this sounds counterintuitive, I know. You want to fight for the marriage. But right now, the way to fight is to surrender the argument. So don't argue with them. When they say they aren't in love with you, look them in the eye and say something calmly like, I understand you feel that way right now. It's hard to hear, but I appreciate you being honest. And then ideally, just drop it, walk away, go do something else. This creates an immediate pattern interrupt. They're expecting you to beg. They're expecting a 3-hour emotional conversation. And when you don't give them that reaction, they're suddenly thrown off balance. They start wondering, wait, why isn't he falling apart? Or why isn't she chasing me? And that confusion is the first tiny seed of mystery. And now let's move on to step number 2. You need to create scarcity. So I mentioned earlier that desire needs space. It needs oxygen. If you're always there, if you're always available, always checking in, and always asking, what's wrong? Well, you're suffocating any chance for a spark to grow. There's a concept in relationship psychology called the pursuer-distancer dynamic. And right now, you're likely the pursuer. You're anxious. You're leaning in. You're trying to fix things. And your spouse is the distancer. And the more you step forward, the more they step back to maintain the distance that they feel they need. If you chase them, they're going to run. Simple physics. So to fix this, you really have to stop chasing. You have to stand still or even take a step back yourself. If your spouse says that they aren't in love with you, they're likely feeling smothered or bored. You need to pull back your energy. You need to focus entirely on your own life. Now, that means you really need to stop initiating all the contact. You stop sending those thinking of you texts in the middle of the day. Stop asking for reassurance. You stop hovering around them in the kitchen, hoping for a crumb of affection. Instead, you get busy, genuinely busy. Go to the gym and actually work out. Pick up a new hobby that gets you out of the house. Maybe reconnect with old friends that you haven't seen in years. You need to remind your spouse and yourself that you're an independent, high-value person who doesn't need them to survive. Now, to be honest, this is terrifying for a lot of my clients. They'll tell me, Brad, if I pull back, won't we just drift further apart? Won't they forget about me? Well, of course, the answer is no. They're not going to forget about you. They live with you or they're married to you. What will happen is that for the first time in a long time, they'll have the chance to miss you. Remember, you can't miss somebody who's always standing right in front of your face. And when they see you thriving on your own, when they realize that you aren't sitting by the phone waiting for them to validate you, that's when the curiosity starts to return. They'll come home and you won't be there. And they'll wonder, where is he? Who's she with? Why do they seem so happy without me? And that curiosity is really the first step towards falling back in love. It shifts the power dynamic from you being the beggar to you being more of the prize. Now, finding the balance between giving them space and ignoring them outright can be tricky. You don't want to be cold or mean. You just want to be distant and happy. If you pull away too hard and you act angry, it is going to backfire. But if you don't pull away enough, then you're going to continue to look needy. Now, if you're not sure where that line is, or if you're worried that your situation is too unique for this kind of generic advice, I've put together a free quiz on my website that can help you out. It only takes about 3 minutes, and it'll analyze your specific situation and tell you exactly how likely it is you're going to be able to save your marriage. You can take the quiz for yourself right now at marriageguy.com/quiz. It's a great tool to get a baseline on where you stand and what your next move should be. I'll also put a link in the description below the video, of course. For now, let's move on to step number 3, which is to break the pattern. Now, the roommate syndrome is really built on routine. It's built on boredom. You come home, you talk about the logistics of the day, you talk about the kids, maybe you watch a show on Netflix, you go to sleep. Repeat. Day after day, year after year. And that routine is the grave where your sex life and your romantic connection have gone to die. If you want your spouse to see you differently, you have to act differently. You have to shock their system a little bit. I don't mean grand romantic gestures. Please do not go out and buy 100 roses or book a surprise vacation to Paris. That kind of thing definitely falls under the trying too hard category, and it's going to look like bribery. What I really mean is just changing your vibe. I mean, changing the way that you show up in the world. Really think about the version of you that your spouse fell in love with 10 or 20 years ago. Were you passive? Were you boring? Were you clingy? Probably not. You were probably confident, maybe a little bit cocky, maybe a little bit mysterious. You had your own life going on. But over the years, you've likely become agreeable just to keep the peace. You've become safe. So you need to disrupt that image that your spouse has of you in their head. If you're usually the one who tends to pursue a nag, stop. Be cool, be unbothered. If you've let yourself go physically, well, this is a huge wake-up call. Join a gym, change your diet, get a haircut, whatever. When you look better, you feel better, and your spouse will notice. Because visual attraction does matter. Or if you're always agreeable and passive, well, have an opinion. Stand your ground on something small. Don't be a doormat. There's nothing less sexy than a partner who agrees with everything just to avoid conflict. A little bit of friction creates heat. Really, you want to become at least somewhat unpredictable. When your spouse can no longer predict exactly what you're going to say or do, they're forced to pay attention to you again. They have to take their eyes off their phone and actually look at you. And that attention is where the spark of attraction comes from. Now, I also want to touch on one more crucial element here, which is the timeline. You really do need to be patient. You can't fix years of eroded attraction in a single weekend. If you start doing these things though, stopping the logic, creating scarcity, breaking the pattern, but you might not see a result in day 1 or day 2. In fact, your spouse might even test you. They might act cold to see if you crumble. They might try to start a fight to see if you'll beg. You're going to have to hold the line. You're going to have to be consistent. Reattracting a spouse who's fallen out of love is really a slow burn. It's not an explosion. It starts with them noticing you again. Then it moves to them being curious about you again. Then they might start initiating small texts or conversations. And then eventually the physical touch returns. But if you rush it, if you try to jump from roommates to lovers in one night, you'll spook them and you'll reset the clock. So let them come to you. Let them bridge the gap. Look, hearing "I love you, but I'm not in love with you" is very painful. I know it hurts. It attacks your ego and your heart simultaneously. But remember, feelings are fluid. They change like the weather. Just because the spark is dim right now doesn't mean that the fire is out. The fact that they're still there, they're still talking to you, means there is still an attachment. If you stop the begging, if you create some mystery, and you focus on becoming the best, most confident version of yourself, you can make your spouse look at you with those fresh, hungry eyes again. You can remind them why they fell for you in the first place. Yes, it does take time. It does take discipline. It requires you to control your own anxiety, but you can do this. Thousands of my clients have done it before you. Guys, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and we reach more people who are struggling with their marriages like you might be. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next video. And don't forget to take my free quiz at marriageguy.com/quiz. It's really the best starting point to figure out if your marriage is still salvageable. I'm Brad Browning, the Marriage Guy. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.